All right, all right, all right. With that, I think we're live. So, good morning, good day, good evening, wherever you are. Today, I finally feel like my voice is rested enough to do the blue-green stream, the Simic commanders. Unfortunately, I did not manage to record the Boros section either. I started, very quickly realized that I shouldn't be doing this soon. So the last stream, we kind of did a deep dive into one of the commanders that we will be talking about for Simic because I was too excited about it. This time, though, just a regular stream, what you've come to know, aka us looking at the potential candidates that will end up in the mainline series videos. And without further ado, we can change scene here and talk about what to expect today. I tried to narrow all the Simic commanders, and there's a bunch of them, a ton, some would say, to 36. 36 will lead to a video that is roughly 2 hours if we manage to find the same like depth of things to talk about than for the last video, which was the last video I did was black and green, and it was super long. And 36 we can split up into 3 days of 12. Now, this week is a little special. I have some time off. I might do more streams this week than just Monday, Tuesday. So we might go through all of the Simic commanders just this week. I will do this if I see that I also have the time to edit and record the Boros video, because I don't want to get the discrepancy between stream content, aka the research process, and the actual recordings to get too big. I still want there to be a little bit of connection. I don't want to move on to 4 colors while we are still stuck with the last 2 color pairs or whatever. So we might find some different contents if I don't manage to, well, yap for 8 hours this week live on stream. But I will try to stream a bit more this week, just as a heads up. I've also been working on a Discord. We'll see how that will go along. It's super finicky and annoying work in my opinion, but I think it could be cool once it's set up. I will pair the launch of the Discord with the next mainline video, most likely. So that's also something to look forward to, at least on my side. Let's talk Simic commanders, though. Last time we did Boros. Boros I expected to be quite narrow and pigeonholed mechanically. Simic I expected the same. Now Boros we know is all about going wide, going aggressive, equipment, auras, stuff like that. So for Simic, I expected a lot of value, a lot of combo, a lot of +1/+1 counters again. What I got is a good solid mixture though. We will see how everything goes when we do a more in-depth look at each one of them. But I have a good feeling about the selection. Now, personally, this color combination doesn't appeal to me all that much, except for Judzi, which I did a deep dive stream on. But let's just jump right in, talk about the first one, Adrix and Nev, the twin casters. The way we do it is like we add 1 and then we move 1 to the main deck. Adrix and Nev, twin casters, 4-mana 2/2 Merfolk Wizard. So Merfolk is a very relevant creature type, so is Wizard. In this case, Wizard most likely the more relevant creature type. It has Ward 2, which is very, very nice. If your commander doesn't have an ETB or just immediately provides value, then having some sort of form of protection, always a welcome sight. If one or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead. So the immediate comparison is Parallel Lives, but with an actual artwork. So Parallel Lives, let's give this a tag. I think AD should suffice. Sort by, or sorry, group by type and tag. And add Parallel Lives. If you read Parallel Lives, 4 mana, if an effect would put one or more tokens onto the battlefield under your control, it puts twice that many of those tokens onto the battlefield instead. Yeah, I think it's very easy to see that this is a 1-to-1 comparison. Now, what do we do with this? And that's the real question. Do we try to go into one of those directions? I think that's certainly possible. Let's search for Merfolk token, because there's a bunch of things that make Merfolk token. So Deeproot Waters, for example, or Deeproot Pilgrimage. Easy peasy. When one or more non-token Merfolk you control become tapped, create a 1/1 blah blah blah. We're not gonna do a deep dive here. There's also not all that much. But remember, for these type of videos, what we're doing is we're building a deck around a commander, and we're trying to showcase different avenues to approach a commander. In this case, one route you could go, you could take this as definitely Merfolk. Although there are better Merfolk commanders out there. Of course, like this is not strictly speaking a Merfolk commander. Now Wizards is a bit more tricky. We could look for Card Time Wizard, because there's no Wizard tokens, I believe. And try and look for token. Let's see. Okay, so we see a bunch of wizards that make 2/2 Drake tokens, and 2/2 Drake tokens with flying are honestly kind of high value. Ether Channeler is just a good card, a flexible card, which is always nice in Commander, especially lower powered Commander, where you don't need to be super hyper focused on power level. Creates a token, but let's be honest, a 1/1 white flying bird token is nothing to write home about. Here we can see that there's fractal tokens. Fractal tokens can get quite big, which is nice. So maybe that's worth a deep dive, or at least like a more focused look on. We see 2/2 Drakes. There's the Amass mechanic, which is interesting because you would get 2 armies, I think. Geralf is interesting. So a 3 mana 1/4 human wizard, zombies you control flying. Blue tap, sacrifice another non-token creature, create an XX blue zombie creature token where X is the sacrificed creature's toughness. I think this guy makes high quality tokens, and those tokens are good enough to be worth it to double. Unlike Ether Channeler or Biomathematician. These are the type of effects we're looking for. I think you either want like genuine mass token creation, create X tokens, which green will have a lot of, or very, very large high value tokens, which, of course, if we're thinking high value tokens, we're also thinking of sorceries and instants that put token copies of stuff into play, which I'm sure we'll also find. And I think that's the thing we want to take a look at next. So a card like Geralf Visionary Stitcher stands for the subtype of card that creates high value, like genuine tokens. Oh, damn it. I also forgot the life split as per usual. Yeah, but we're still here. Now, next, we take a look at cards that say Create token copy. And there's going to be a bunch of them. Back from the brink, 6 mana, exile a creature card from your graveyard and pay its mana cost. Put a token onto the battlefield that's a copy of that card. Do this only as a sorcery. I think this card is not particularly strong, but I've been wanting to, yes, showcase it and also like try it out. I think it's really cool. It kind of doubles up your creatures, and it makes it so your graveyard becomes more of an extension of your hand. In black, that is kind of always the case with a lot of reanimation spells. But if we're thinking blue-green, the usual way is to first get the card back into your hand and then play it from your hand. Back from the brink makes it so you can immediately access your graveyard, which is quite cool. Arcane Artisan, 3 mana, 03. 3 mana tap. Target player draws a card, then exiles a card from their hand. If a creature card is exiled this way, that player creates a token that's a copy of that card. When Arcane Artisan leaves the battlefield, though, exile all tokens created with it at the beginning of the next end step. Okay, I think that's something that we can definitely work with. Oftentimes when... So unfortunately, sometimes it's the case that the templating works out this way. You would create a token, and then you, for some reason, get a second token. And then when Arcane Artisan leaves the battlefield, it takes all the tokens with it. Sometimes it works out the way that you get to keep the other token. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but in this case, that's definitely not going to be the case. You're going to create twice as many tokens, but Arcane Artisan is definitely going to take all of them with it. Still, it's pretty nice that it's a 3-drop. You can play on curve. Turn 4, you play your commander, and then turn 5, you can activate it. So that is something I very much enjoy. Let's look at some other cards. Create a token that's a copy of this. Okay, that's nice. It grows quite quickly. So you would play this on 4, but it doesn't work out that nicely on the curve with your commander, though. Because you either play this or your commander on 4, and either way it kind of sucks, because you'll have to wait 1 extra turn to get the benefits. Let's try and find some other good cards. I mean, yes. Bramble Sovereign. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield, you may pay 1 and a green. If you do, that creature's controller creates a token that's a copy of that creature. This, in combination with your commander, makes it so you can always get a second creature for just 2 mana, but instead of a second, you also get a third. There's, of course, also just, 3 mana, create a token that's a copy of target creature you control. Boom. Easy inclusion. For each creature target player controls, create a token that's a copy of that creature. Double that. That is very, very, very nice. Dance of Many, also something that works quite nicely. Wait. Okay. When this enchantment enters, create a token that's a copy of target non-token creature. When this enchantment leaves the battlefield, exile the token. When the token leaves the battlefield, sacrifice this enchantment. And you need to pay blue to keep it around. Okay. Okay. It's a very cool card. I don't know if it fits that well with this commander. Dual Nature is a bit like Bramble Sovereign. 6 mana enchantment. Whenever a creature card comes into play, its controller puts a creature token into play that's a copy of the creature. Whenever a creature card leaves the play, remove all tokens that have the same name. And when this leaves the play, remove all tokens created with it from the game. Similar problem, though. I don't think it works all that nicely with our commander specifically. It is too generic of a payoff for everyone at the table, and I would be kind of scared to hand out that many tokens. There's just generically good stuff like Asika's Chariots, which you could talk about. 4 mana, 4/4. It comes with 2/2 green cat creature tokens. Whenever it attacks, you create a token that's a copy of target token you control. That's very nice. Esoteric Duplicator, I've seen in action a little bit. 3 mana. It's an artifact clue. When you sacrifice it or another artifact, you may pay 2. If you do, at the beginning of the next end step, create a token that's a copy of that artifact. It just makes it so you could theoretically keep sacrificing this or another artifact. And you could start going positive with Adrix and Nev, the twin casters, which is also quite nice. Maybe we found enough stuff that creates good copies. Although, like Helm of the Host needs a mention, I guess. Oh, there's so much good stuff to copy. Or, sorry, to copy with. Kind of also want to talk about the frog guy. There's like a frog instant that creates a 1/1 copy of something that is also a frog. But for now, that's good enough. Again, we don't need to go super in depth. We just want to showcase some of the things that you could be doing with this commander. We've talked a lot about different ways to create good tokens or like high value tokens. We've talked a bit about Merfolk. We've talked a bit about Wizard being a second, like theoretically interesting subtype to this. What we should do next is find the stuff that we want to be copying, right? If one or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many tokens are created instead. That still means we need to find good stuff to copy. Now, that is a very wide field of cards. We're talking blue and green here, except for, well, cards that have X in their mana cost. I don't see much that could go wrong here. Most blue-green creatures just come with a million value points attached to them. In this case, I like to go to EDH Rec. Because that's what I would usually do. And just try and find out what other people have found. My goal is not to showcase how good of a deck builder or unique of a deck builder I am. My goal is always to inspire the community, to give an idea of what you could be doing with this commander to get people brewing themselves. Let's find out what people are copying. Well, it seems people are going heavy on the landfall sub-theme that you could be choosing, which I find interesting. The Biovisionary is funny. I guess that is an alternate win con that you could be choosing. 3 mana, 2/3 at the beginning of the end step. If you control 4 or more creatures named Biovisionary, you win the game. What I find funny here is that, I mean, obviously this card was designed for a 60 card format where you can be putting, you can play 4 Biovisionaries in your 60 card deck. In Commander, usually a card like this would be accompanied by the text. A deck can have either any amount of creatures named by a visionary or at least 4 cards named by a visionary in it. In this case, that's not the case, so I like the challenge, even though some people don't like to have these alternate win cons in their games. We already had the Bio-Waste Blob. Maybe it's worth. It's an ooze, 4 mana, 0/0. Oozes you control get +1/+1 at beginning of your upkeep if you control a commander. Create a token that's a copy of Bio-Waste Blob. So, of course, immediately you will be getting 2 copies of Bio-Waste Blob, turning all of them into 3/3s. And then the next turn, that is how exponential growth works. Is it still exponential? If it's like... Well, whatever. I'm not smart enough to answer that question. But then you would get 6, and then 12. Wait, would you get 6? 3? But everyone creates 2? So it's +6, you would get 9. I mean, that's pretty good. That kind of gets out of hand very quickly. Bio-Waste Blob kind of seems like it was designed with Edrix and Nev in mind. But it references to Simic. which makes me believe it's from a different era of Magic. But, you know, it's possible. Then, yeah, all of these effects are kind of double up. So here, Tendershoot Dryad, it creates a bunch of Suprawling tokens, and then it gives all Suprawlings +2/+2, as long as you have the City's Blessing, aka 10 permanents. And if you make just one copy, not only do you get twice as many Suprawling tokens, of course, but they also all get +4/+4. That's very nice, but it's not particularly creativity. Like, it's not particularly creative, I would say. Gruff Triplets, I remember this card somewhat. 6 mana, 3/3. When it enters, if it isn't a token, create 2 tokens that are copies of it. When it dies, put a number of +1/+1 counters equal to its power on each creature you controlled named Gruff Triplets. Okay, so they kind of get stronger the more of them die. Also not super interesting. What else? I really like Octomancer. 5 mana, 3/3. Gift an octopus. That means you may promise an opponent a gift as you cast a spell. If you do, when it enters, create an 8/8 blue octopus creature token under their control. At the beginning of each end step, create a token that's a copy of target creature token that entered the battlefield this turn. Octomancer really works nicely because let's say in the late game you create a token of whatever, a Biovisionary or anything else that is high value, then not only does Edrix give you one more token, but Octomancer gives you one as well. All right. Let's circle back to the commander and see if we've missed something or if there's another avenue. For Mana Merfolk Wizard or 2, if one or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead. Very important, that means the Octomancer, by the way, it still only creates 1 8/8 under an opponent's control, but you will be getting 2 8/8s, which just inherently makes this card less symmetrical. Although in Commander, giving 2 players out of 4 something already means it's not technically symmetrical. I think, for a starter, that is good enough. And I think I'll move on to the next commander on the list. Let's add one. Let's move one. And talk about Alaundo the Seer. Probably butchered that name. Let's give it its tag AL. It has a lot of text. It's a 4 mana 3/5 human shaman. It taps to draw a card, and then exile a card from your hand and put a number of time counters on it equal to its mana value. It gains when the last time counter is removed from this card. If it's exiled, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. If you cast a creature spell this way, it gains haste until end of turn. Then remove a time counter from each other card you own in exile. Now, the first thing that is interesting to me is, obviously, this effect is very reminiscent of Suspend, where you exile stuff with time counters on it, and then you get to cast it for free later on, and those creatures even gained haste. My question is it inherent to time counters that you remove them on upkeep? Because it doesn't specifically say you remove them on upkeep. It only says when you activate this ability, remove a time counter. So let's read. And here it says Alaundo's ability is not the same as the Suspend ability. However, if you exile a card with Suspend this way, the Suspend ability will also cause you to remove time counters from it. Alaundo's ability will remove time counters from all cards you own in exile, even the ones that were put there another way, such as with the Suspend ability. And if you exile a card with mana value 0, such as a land card, no time counters will be placed on it. Unless you find a way to put time counters on it in exile, the triggered ability it gains from Alaundo will never trigger. So, we found that It is not the same as Suspend. It does work with Suspend, but 0 mana cards are out of the picture. My first question is then, because it's the easiest to answer, what good Suspend cards are there? Now, Ancestral Vision is Ancestral Recall, but as a Suspend 4 card, target player draws 3 cards. That's pretty good. Even in Commander. What else? The rest kind of meh. Until end of turn, you may play lands and cast spells from your graveyard, so it's a bit like Yawgmoth's Will, but interestingly enough in green. You may play land and cast spells from your graveyard. Interesting. I didn't know this card existed. If a card would be put into your graveyard this turn from anywhere, exile a card. Of course, Inevitable Betrayal is the same as Bribery. Search target opponent's library for a creature card. Put that card onto the battlefield under your control. Then that player shuffles. What's interesting here is, yes, you can suspend it. And if you later activate your commander, that's nice. That's perfect. But you can also like suspend this with your commander. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, remove a time counter on it. So this will tick down even if you suspend it with your commander. Personally, Lotus Bloom, maybe not as much. You could be exiling stuff like Mox Tantalite. Also not the biggest fan of that. I really think these suspend cards should have relatively high impact. Taigam. Relatively new card. I have no idea what it does, but I remember it being quite good. 2 mana, 2/2. Whenever you cast your second spell each turn, copy it, then exile the spell you cast with 4 time counters on it. If it doesn't have suspend, it gains suspend. That's pretty cool, because second spell, yes, we're of course thinking of instants and sorceries, but second spell could be a creature, and then you copy it and exile the spell. That's pretty cool. And what we thankfully also have in the selection of cards here is all the cards that remove time counters from stuff in the zone. In the exile zone. Clock Spinning, 1 mana, but it has buyback 3, so you could be paying 4 mana and you would be getting this card back. Choose a counter on target permanent or suspend a card. Remove that counter from that permanent or card, or put another one of those counters on it. In our case, we'll almost always be using this to remove the last time counter and surprise someone. Because remember, timing restrictions do not matter for this type of effect. If something tells you to cast a card, aka when the last time counter is removed, you may cast this card. This is a sorcery, but suspend triggers in your upkeep, you still get to cast a sorcery, right? Obviously. We saw more of those type of effects. We saw, for example, Jorah's Timebug, 2 mana, 1/2, taps, choose target permanent you control or suspended card you own. If that permanent or card has a time counter on it, you may remove a time counter from it. Now, tricky, but this doesn't work because the cards we will be putting into exile with our commander are not actually suspended cards. They act and feel and look and smell like suspended cards. They're not suspended cards. Unlike here where it says, oh, no, actually it still doesn't work. Choose target counter on a permanent or suspended card. It works with Ancestral Vision. It doesn't work with all the rest. Interesting. All of these care about suspended cards. It's weird that this commander is templated this way. Interesting. Let's go back and reread Alaundo and add all of these cards. So, first aspect we can cover in the video is you can still like suspend Ancestral Vision, and then later on, if you activate this ability, you could remove a counter from Ancestral Vision. What doesn't work is suspending Ancestral Vision with Alaundo to get rid of the Suspend 4 because, well, it would have 0 time counter, so no time counter can be removed. For mana 3/5, draw a card, then exile a card from your hand and put a number of time counters on it equal to its mana value. It gains when the last time counter is removed from this card. If it's exiled, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. If you cast a creature spell this way, it gains haste. To me, this reads like it's terrible at cheating into play big stuff. But then why would you be playing it? This feels like a very, very, very weird commander. I could definitely use some like inspiration here. Draw a card, exile it. I'd be interested to see if this works with like something like Foretell. Maybe we can read Foretell. So now, okay, Foretell is a special action. That's interesting, of course. Blah blah blah. I think if a card is not foretold, you can cast it from exile. I think, honestly, it's not that big of a question. I kind of know the answer already. So that doesn't work. Okay, well then tell me, Mr. Hive Mind. What do we do with Alaundo? It really feels like you're going super cheap. Okay, so we're untapping him a lot. We're playing all the untapped stuff that we have available to us. But what are the payoffs? What are people doing here? I really want to talk about Murkfiend Liege. Okay. We're going to move this to the second screen for a second. And return to this. Now, what are people doing? They're untapping him with stuff like Kiora's Follower. They're untapping him with stuff like... Ooh, the Chakram Retriever is quite nice, but let's find a different example. Murkfiend Liege, as I said. Very nice, because it gives you a bunch of untaps. Murkfiend Liege, of course, from... That's Eventide, I believe. Each green creature gets +1/+1. Each blue creature gets +1/+1. More importantly, untap all green and or blue creatures you control during each other player's untap step. So kind of like a Seedborn Muse, but for creatures. What else? Man, people are really going heavily on untap stuff. Freed from the Real. Interesting one. It's a card that always has looked super strong to me. 3 mana Aura for blue tap enchanted creature or for blue untap enchanted creature. So that's very nice. We still don't quite know what we should be cheating into play, which is what I am most curious about. Because if you're untapping a bunch, then yes, you can choose really, really, really big creatures. Sphinx of the Second Sun makes a lot of sense. Which is a Sphinx that I've also seen in action, and it's quite strong in lower brackets. 8 mana, very expensive, but of course apparently we're trying to cheat it into play by untapping Alaundo a bunch. At the beginning of your post-combat main phase, there is an additional beginning phase after this phase. Now, beginning phase is not a term I was familiar with before this Sphinx. Beginning phase is an untap, an upkeep, and a draw step. So this is card advantage, but this is also, in Alaundo's case, an extra tap that we're getting. And remember, since Alaundo is card neutral, right? He's not card disadvantage. He draws you a card first and then you exile a card. You are going to Like, tap this a bunch, untap it, draw more cards that you can then exile. Potentially, those cards are stuff like Kiara's Follower, which would gain haste once it comes into play. So that's interesting. This commander is a bit of a toughie for me to crack because they've isolated his ability a little. The fact that it doesn't work with Suspend, but it also doesn't work with extra upkeeps, is quite baffling to me. Maybe people are just going through the deck and like completely comboing off. Maybe that's what it is. I kind of would like to find a personal touch to this. Because just untapping him over and over again is not that interesting. One card that I want to talk about that I own and want to play at some point. I think I own probably all of the rares from Strixhaven by now. Double Major. Blue-green instant, copy target creature spell you control, except it isn't legendary if the spell is legendary. This one to me is interesting because Alaundo copies or pairs so well with multiple copies of Alaundo. So, oh god. It's probably one of the many frog cards. I now will have to try and find it. We're trying to see non-legendary copy. Except it's not legendary, is usually the wording. Alaundo scales really, really, really well with itself. Whenever you cast a spell that blah, 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 create a token. Is it different wording? Not legendary copy. Maybe token. Legendary token. Let's search for just legendary token. What I'm trying to look for is cards that create token copies of something, but the token copy is not a legendary, like Helm of the Host, but we already talked about Helm of the Host, and will have talked about in the video, which is always a consideration. I feel like there's gotta be more stuff. Am I crazy? Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except it isn't legendary. For sure there's more cards like this, no? I'm not crazy. Hmm. 8/8. I mean, we can just take Helm of the Host again, but I would like to find a different templating here. Copy token isn't legendary. Okay. So isn't legendary maybe is the wording we are looking for? Oh, minus this universe is beyond, I guess. Imposter Syndrome. Create a token that's a copy of target creature you control, except the token has flying and isn't legendary. Okay, I mean, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Spark Double does the same, but as a creature. 4 mana. You may have it enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or a planeswalker you control, except it enters with a +1/+1 counter and isn't legendary. Stuff like this. Because just imagine using your OG Alaundo, you then exile a, what's its face? A Spark Double. It takes a bit, of course. You activate Alaundo a bunch more, and then Spark Double comes into play. Alaundo specifically says if you cast a creature spell this way, it gains haste until end of turn. That means Spark Double comes in, becomes a copy of Alaundo, a non-legendary copy of Alaundo. It has haste, so you can then tap it, immediately draw another card, and take down every card again. Which is kind of crazy and immediately makes me want to build an Alaundo deck. which is funny because this card was not on my radar at all. Because once you have stuff like Spark Double, you can then create just a copy of that non-legendary token, although there might be something in the mysterious, ominous land of layers that forbids you from doing that, because I know copying usually copies the OG copy, not the copier, which is super intuitive. Thank you, Magic, for that. But we still don't really have an answer of what we are cheating into play, except for Sphinx of the Second Sun, which is a bit lame. But maybe we just choose from the cabinet of many wonderful large game enders, right? If we're untapping this guy a bunch, we can also just be playing Omniscience, right? Play Alaundo, exile Omniscience. It has 10 counters, but then we just untap it a bunch of times. Seems a bit ambitious, and I'm still not fully on board that playing really expensive cards is the way to go here. What I want to look at is maybe combinations of cards that say untap and draw. The idea here being the card replaces itself, but it also untaps Alaundo. Let's see. Tap and untap wizards? No. Untap all creatures until end of turn. Whenever a creature an opponent controls blocks, draw a card. And draw a card. Okay, super expensive because it hasn't seen a reprint. That's a bit lame. Cerulean Wisps gives us kind of a combo spin. Replaces itself, untaps Alaundo. Huh. Might not be much more to this. Unfortunately, we are looking at a bunch of stuff that taps something and it doesn't untap, but untap all non-land permanents you control and all non-land permanents that player controls. That's pretty good. Choose an opponent. You and that player each draw 3 cards, which is nice. We want card advantage. We want a good selection of cards in our hand so that we can then choose the best one to exile to Alaundo. And additionally, you untap all non-land permanents you control and all non-land permanents that player controls. That means all of your untapped guys also become untapped, and it gives you another spin. So I think this is kind of a storm deck. Now that the more I think about it, I feel like the guy with a hammer that everything looks like to whom everything looks like a nail. To me, everything just looks like a storm deck. Of course you want to untap all creatures all the time. Oh no, I'm so lost in the sauce. Okay, but we should talk about it nonetheless. I think it's genuinely one of the best directions to take your Alaundo deck in. It is... Oh... Dramatic reversal? Oh, no, not Oracle, but name, I guess? Yeah, untap all non-land permanents you control. I'm pretty sure that is probably the way to go. You play Alaundo, and you play all of these cards like Kiora's Follower, and there's a million more. Wait, if we go back to creatures, we can say... Give me just an example that is more well-known. Let's say Vizia, because I know Vizia from the combo deck. Vizia of the Hidden Sands or something? Tumbling Sands? Yeah. So, the basic deck idea is you play a bunch of stuff that untaps your Alaundo. You play your Cura's Followers, you play your Vizias of Tumbling Sands, and of course Alaundo itself taps itself. And at one point you hit a dramatic reversal, meaning you get to do it a bunch more times. Maybe not the most interesting to some people, but in my head, it sounds pretty fun. I'm not gonna lie. Might just be me as a combo player that turns everything into a combo, but who knows? Let's move on though to something that I don't see being broken in the same way, shape, or form. I moved this a little too far. Arithmethes. Wonderful name. Slumbering Isle. Let's add one. Let's move one. Give it its tag. Arithmethes. Oh my god. Arithmethes is a 4-mana 12/12 Kraken. But of course, it has a downside. Because it enters tapped with 5 slumber counters on it. As long as it has a slumber counter on it, it's a land. Whenever you cast a spell, you may remove a slumber counter from Arithmethes. As a land, Arithmethes taps for green and blue, which is an ability it will retain as a creature, but of course it's like the only thing you can do. Alright. First glance to me, it is like you are playing almost like a bounce land. It is like playing Simic Growth Chamber as your commander. Right? Simic Growth Chamber usually means you're taking a turn off to play a land that taps for blue and green. Arithmethes somewhat reminds me of that, right? You spend 4 mana to get a dual land. Of course, like Simic Growth Chamber still only ramps you by 1 because you return a land, blah, blah, blah. It's not a 1-to-1 comparison. But it has a similar vibe. What is the upside? Because there's also creatures that tap for 2 mana. Will I be able to remember one? Something with a G. Surely there's not a lot of cards that have a G in their name. That's not the name. 3 mana legendary. I'm looking for 3 mana legendary, and I'm almost certain she's an elf. And she costs 2 green. I am looking for a comparison in a 3 mana commander. That is, I mean, we could be choosing Rishkar. Maybe she wasn't an elf, actually. Let's choose Rishka as an example. So, why am I choosing Rishka? Rishkar is a 3 mana 2/2 elf druid. When it enters, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Each creature you control with a counter on it has tap, add green. To me, Rishkar does, in parts, what Arithmethes does, but for 1 mana cheaper. Arithmethes, you take a turn off, like you would do if you're casting Rishkar, and then it taps for blue-green. Rishkar has multiple upsides if we're just looking at that side of Arithmethes. He comes down a turn earlier, and if you already have creatures, you can immediately use the mana. That means, in my opinion, I mean, Rishkar not perfect because he's mono green, but still, it means this territory of viewing this as a land from the command zone. Not necessarily the best way to approach Arithmethes, in my opinion. Then we have a different avenue. And that avenue is, well, it's a 4 mana 12/12. But then we also need to ask ourselves the question of, well, how good is a 4 mana 12/12 in Commander? And I would argue it's pretty meaningless. Players are either running removal or board wipes or tokens or like their solemn simulacrums to chump block Arithmethes. So what is the space that this slumbering creature can occupy in this food chain of commanders, where it finds its place and isn't like immediately brought to extinction? That's the question, I guess, right? Arixmethes is an interesting design, but where does it find its home? Now, I've seen this card in play a couple of times. And what it has done well as a creature in the 99 is the slumbering part. And by that I mean, if you look at the clause, whenever you cast a spell, you may remove a slumber counter from Arixmethes. In practice, the way this worked was I would be sitting on a board wipe, but it always felt bad to cast the board wipe because the Arixmethes player would just refuse to turn it into a creature and play into my board wipe. Instead, they would sit on one counter, and of course, the turn after I board wipe, they would turn Arixmethes into a creature. But is that good enough? And what can we do with it? It certainly is interesting, but I'm not sure I can make it work. But sometimes that is also fine. Like for these videos, I don't need to present the solution always. Sometimes I genuinely put commanders in there to get like an idea from the community. And Arixmethes might be one of those. So what I was thinking is there is certain mechanics. Oh god. Ferocious? Is that how you write it? There's certain mechanics that work in tandem with having large creatures. And of course, mechanics alone are not enough, but there's also good cards that work with large creatures. One of those is Fanatic of Ronus. Taps for green, but if you have a creature with power 4 or greater, you can tap for 4 green instead, which is an insane rate, of course, for a 2-drop to tap for 4 green mana. That is ritual, like that is above ritual value. Then we have Stubborn Denial, very playable card. 1 blue mana, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1. If you control a creature with power 4 or greater, counter that spell instead. So it's a hard counter for a non-creature spell if you control Arixmethes, and it's a creature. Well, but looking at this, there's not a lot. I know there's not only ferocious, but there is also a different keyword that looks at you having power total 8 or greater. Power 8. Let's look at power 8. Not the power 9, we're looking at power 8. Yes, formidable. Formidable is another keyword that triggers off of creatures you control having total power 8 or greater, which of course is quite easy if your commander has 12 power. But is there good cards here? That is the real question. Owlbear Shepherd is quite good. 3 mana, 1/4. Simply draw a card at end step if you control a creature with power 8 or greater. Or sorry, if you control creatures with power 8 or greater. Shaman of the Forgotten Ways is a 3 mana, 2/3. It taps for 2 mana in any combination of colorless to your mana pool, but you can only cast creature spells. Once Formidable is active, you can pay 11 mana, and each player's life total becomes the number of creatures he or she controls. Activate this ability only if you control creatures with power total 8, total power 8 or greater. Of course, this is just biorhythm, but on a creature, on a stick, on a robot, which I guess we should talk about. It's not biorhythm. Name biorhythm. Oh, that's not how you write name. Bio? That's probably not how you write rhythm, by the way. Oh no. Whatever, you know the unbanned card. They just unbanned 8 mana sorcery, each player's life total becomes equal to the amount of creatures. Can we find more? Let's look. Let's give a quick glance at the EDH page to see if other people have managed to solve the riddle, the mystery. Of course, the direct way to go with this, the route one, is it route one what the saying is, to go for a Kraken, like a sea creature deck? There's also lands matters, I guess, but it's also not that interesting. This one is a toughie. I'll leave it at that because I'm not sure I can find much more stuff. We're formidable and ferocious. We can make the comparisons in the video, but then it really is up to the community to find something better than me because I'm not smart enough to crack the code. Whoops. Add one and move one to the sideboard. We've arrived at the Champions League with Clement CL. Clement the Worrywart is a 3-mana 3/3 frog druid. It has vigilance, which is nice. And of course, we're moving on. Which is nice. Whenever it or another creature you control enters, return up to one target creature you control with lesser mana value to its owner's hand. Frogs you control have tap, add green or blue, spend this mana only to cast a creature spell. Now, of course, the most natural way is to pair this with a bunch of frogs. And I still think this is going to happen. You're going to be playing all the good frogs, which I assume there's not that many. Especially if you're limiting yourself to two colors. Clifftop Lookout is nice. It puts a land from the top 4 cards of your library into the battlefield. Pretty good. Super solid. When this guy enters, you tap up the 1 creature and put 3 stun counters on it. If you control that creature, you draw 2 cards. Super solid. Dowerport Mage, also very good card. 2 mana 1/3. Whenever 1 or more creatures you control leave the battlefield without dying. That means also when they're exiled, by the way. You draw a card. It also can return target card to your hand. Remember, with your commander out, all of these cards will also tap for mana, which is very nice. We can talk about Grolnok, which is going to be a commander later on this list. Whenever a frog you control attacks, mill 3 cards. Whenever a permanent card is put into your graveyard from your library, you exile it with a croak counter on it. You may play lands and cast spells from among cards you own in exile with croak counters on them. So a bit of card advantage. There is Mistbreath Elder, which is like not that great, but other frogs you control of Ward 1. There's a lot of good stuff here. And by a lot, I mean there's a decent amount. It's not that many. Of course, we're mostly looking at ETBs that are interesting here, because remember, we'll be bouncing all of this stuff to our hand again and again and again. But that is not the only direction you can take Clement in. Yes, it has the word frog on it, but that doesn't mean you need to full commit to frogs. Instead, what comes to my mind first is creatures that produce mana when you pick them up. So that potentially you could sneak these in for free to kind of go down, to get an extra ETB, let's say. First, though, let's search for the term whenever creature enters. Because we'll be generating a bunch of ETBs. That's for sure, right? That is what this guy came to do. Okay. Whenever this creature enters, I guess is the new wording, which makes it super difficult to look for. But under your control. This should get rid of all the creatures that have an ETB themselves. Nice. This one is one of the cards I was looking for. 2 mana, 2/2. Revolt. When this guy enters, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn, add green to your mana pool. This means you can just go down a step, return this to hand, play it again. It costs you absolutely nothing, and then you can go down to a 1-drop. Your curve, by the way, will be pretty intense, I would say. Very tightly packed. I don't think you can afford to skip many CMCs. I have the wrong wording clearly. Is there a card that is named Warden? Warden. Because I know, yeah, Essence Warden. Whenever another creature comes into play. Okay, maybe that is the wording we need to look for. Another creature comes into play. Another creature comes into play. Another creature comes into play. Order. Another creature comes into play. I'm a little confused why this doesn't have any hits. Comes into. Maybe enters nowadays? Okay. Whenever a non-token spirit you control enters, that's not what we're looking for. Whenever a bear enters, that's not what we're looking for. Alliance is a good keyword. We can look at alliance. Let's remember alliance, I guess. Or even search for it immediately. Alliance. So alliance, pretty new keyword. You see there's not that many cards. But stuff like Galagrita is pretty good. Whenever another creature enters under your control, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. +1/+1 counter on it. Create a tap treasure token. You gain 2 life. Easy peasy. That's like a super good inclusion in your Clement deck. Here, you simply gain a life, so that's not that great. But yeah, stuff like this exists. It's out there, and it should be put into your Clement deck. Alongside the frogs, most likely. But this is not going to be just frog type. I think that's the most boring way to approach Clement. And then, what else are we are looking for? Mostly like the best ETBs in blue-green. Are we not? We're trying to find the stuff that either leaves battlefield or enters battlefield or insane. Leaves battlefield. This one comes to mind. Anti-causal vestige. Yeah, I just saw a video about it yesterday. 6 mana, 7/5. When this creature leaves the battlefield, draw a card, then you may put a number of permanent cards with mana value less than or equal to the number of lands you control from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. Warp 4 means you may cast this from your hand without for its warp cost. Exile this creature at the beginning of the next end step. Then you may cast it from exile on a later turn. So what's nice here is, I mean, a 6-drop won't be easy to return to your hand with Clement's ability. But it is a 4 mana card that can return up to mana value 5 to your hand. And that is very nice. Which reminds me of another mechanic that is so often called upon when you are looking to do something with high mana value. And that is, of course, Evoke. Evoke, known to be a fair and fun keyword. Stuff like Moldrifter, 5 mana, 2/2. When it enters, draw 2 cards. Quite simple, quite innocent. And you can evoke it for 3. That means you pay 3 mana, you cast a spell, you draw your 2 cards, but then Muldrifter dies immediately. It still has CMC or mana value 5, which would mean you could return something up to mana value 4 to your hand. If you have something like Endurance that has Flash, you could even, I don't know, do I find an example here? Probably not. Probably not. But yeah, it's interesting that these evoke cards come up again and again. Evoke this for 2, pick up something that costs 3 or 4. It's just super flexible. Wistfulness, I mean, the price tag doesn't come out of nowhere. It's really good in modern, like, mass reanimation type decks. I think here we have an example, by the way. You could be playing Endurance and Subtlety in your deck. You flash in Endurance for its evoke cost. Put 2 triggers on the stack, or 3 triggers on the stack if Clement is in the battlefield. You return target card that costs less than 3. You sacrifice Endurance, and you get Endurance effect. You can even resolve like a couple of these triggers, but before you sacrifice your Endurance, you can then Subtlety for its evoke cost. It costs 4, which means you could return Endurance to your hand. That's a pretty neat trick. I'm sure it won't come up often, especially in a format like Commander that is singleton. But it's pretty funny that, yeah, you could be evoking these cards and getting them back. Certainly interesting. And then Anti-Causal Vestige. I know it doesn't work quite as well, but yeah, for me it's just a cheap way to return something like a Dream Dew Entrancer. 4 mana is quite a lot of mana if you're not ramping a lot. But then you could just be playing Anti-Causal Vestige and return it to your hand anyways. Because Anti-Causal Vestige, of course, costs 6. And what is especially nice here, I mean, just looking at these 2 cards here, it immediately showcases how nice this is. So you play Dream Dew Entrancer, you draw your 2 cards, or you stun something. Hey, hi, Pharaoh. Good to see you back. So you play your Dream Dew in 3, you play Clement, of course. Then you play your Dream Dew in Tranza. Either you put a stun counter on something, or you draw your 2 cards. Then you play Anti-Causal Vestige. For 4 mana, you warp it, put it into play. You get to return your Dream Dew Entrancer to your hand. Then, at the end, because we warped the card, you exile Anti-Causal Vestige. You draw another card, and then you get to put something into play that presumably costs 4 or less, because we will have 4 lands. And it could be Dream Dew Entrancer, which you could then use to again draw 2 cards, return something else. So I feel like there's something here with warp. We can take a quick look at other warp cards to see if there's something quite as nice, but I know that the Vestige is already one of the better warp cards out there. There's more though. Right, this isn't a creature. I specifically want creatures. Whenever a land you control enters double power. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw that many cards. All of these cards are nice, but they don't specifically work well with what we are doing here. If a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. I mean, this just means so you can double up your pickups, I guess. If we're thinking this to the extreme, we are probably playing a bunch of 1 and 0 mana cards, right? If we're playing our Essence Warden, we can be playing Ornithopter. No? I'm not sure if it's worth it, but the opportunity cost of Commander is also not that high. So I imagine a world where we played this, and then anti-causal vestige. We return this, we put it into play, and then we return whatever, a hidden herbalist. But we always go down the chain to 0 to get a lot of creature ETBs. I know, unfortunately, that creature ETBs is something that is mostly tied to white and red. But we can take a quick look, actually. Because I have a Naya deck that is all about creature ETBs. It is a hidden commander deck, which is one of my favorite decks I have. Prosperous Innkeeper gains you a bunch of life. That's very nice. Warden of the Grove is a very good inclusion. Whenever another non-token creature you control enters, it endures X, where X is the number of counters on this creature. Put X +1/+1 counters on this creature, or create an XX white spirit creature token. So that's pretty good. Where you could be creating a bunch of spirits. So most interesting, and then we are Simic. So that's quite nice. Of course, Eternal Witness makes a great inclusion in your Clement deck, because you can bounce it and retain the value a bunch. Like, return all the cards from your graveyard again and again and again. But yeah, unfortunately, oh, well, Guardian Project is pretty good. Or Path of Discovery. 4 mana enchantments that create a lot of value, either by exploring or straight up drawing you a card. They work nicely in tandem, by the way. Right? Explore the land first and then draw the non-lands. Okay, okay. I think we've built a nice package for... We've built a nice package for Clement the Worrywart. So many cards, by the way. Do I need to refresh? Well, all my new cards. All right. So yeah, there's a million things to talk about. We can talk about the good friends. Not good friends, the good frogs. We can talk about Evoke and Warp. About cards that care about creature ETBs a bunch. And that should be enough for this section of the video. Where's Clement, by the way? Shouldn't he be down here? Add one. Move one to the sideboard. There he is. Okay. From frog to bear, but still a druid. Doc Urlock Grizzle Genius. Let's take a look at you. Add one. Move one to the main deck. Give you the DO tag. Doc Urlock, Grizzle Genius. 2 mana, which I love. 2 mana commanders are super great. Bear Druid, 2/3. Spells you cast from your graveyard or from exile cost 2 less to cast. Plotting cards from your hand also costs 2 less. Of course, this alludes to the fact that bears care about the number 2 a bunch. Spells you cast from your graveyard or from exile cost 2 less to cast. And plotting cards. Let's take the easy route this guy sends us on, like the easy path he sets us down on first, and look at cards that care about plot. And I don't mean in like an anime way of plot, but genuine plot. So of course Fibblethip kind of works nicely here. It is a 3 mana 1/1 Homunculus. Whatever. War 2. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. The top card of your library has plot. It costs 2 less. The plot cost is equal to its mana cost. That does include colors, by the way. And you may plot non-land cards from the top of your library Oh, but it only cares about plotting from hand. Man, why put a safety valve on this card specifically? That's so weird. Okay, let's look at other plot cards. Draw a card, then draw a card for each other instant and sorcery spell you've cast this turn. Well, cost reduction makes us think of Storm, so why not? And plot inherently is a good Storm mechanic, because you will be able to chain a bunch of spells during the same turn. Look at the top 3 cards of your library. You may exile a non-land card from among them. If you do, it becomes plotted. That's pretty good. Oh, it costs 5 mana. Yeah. Plot, not the most... It is not exactly the keyword that opens up the most potential in a straight up search. But I know Outcaster Trailblazer is a pretty good card. 3 mana, 4/2. When it enters, you add 1 mana of any color. Whenever another creature with power 4 or greater enters, you draw a card. You can plot for 3, aka for 1. And then exile this card from your hand and then cast it for free at a later turn, which is quite nice. But blood only is a sorcery, which is very important. This guy's a mythic, so he might be good 5 mana 5/5. Whenever another creature enters, put X+1/1 counter on it, where X is its power. Not bad. Quite expensive for an effect like this. Oh, by the way, of course. As per usual, I forgot to move on. Is that really it? That is quite annoying. That this is all there is to this. When this enters, Graveyard gains flashback. That is like a perfect card because you can plot it for 1 blue, and then later it gives a card an instant or sorcery in your graveyard flashback, which will then also cost less, of course. And ooh, we already found a card that works super nicely with this guy, and it is Gaia's Will. No, CLDO. Now, Gaia's Will is like Yawgmoth's Will, but in green. Until end of turn, you may play lands and cast spells from your graveyard. And Doc Orlok really shines here. Of course, if a card would be put into your graveyard from anywhere this turn, you exile that card. But everything costs 2 less, and that's quite nice. Now, blue and green aren't the most ritualistic colors, I guess. They don't have the most rituals. So, next step, of course, is yes, we've looked at plot. There's not a lot of good plot cards. Let's look at everything that you can cast from your graveyard. At first, only one mechanic comes to mind, and that is, of course, flashback. But it is, thankfully, kind of an evergreen mechanic by now. 77 results. I mean, that's enough to build a commander deck if 50% of them are really good, which that won't be the case. Cackling Counterpart. Create a token that's a copy of a creature you control. Flashback 1,000,000. Okay. Catalyst Stone is interesting because it doubles up as your commander in a pinch. 2 mana artifact. Flashback costs you pay costs 2 less. Flashback costs your opponent's costs 2 more. I really like when your commander is not doing everything on its own, but you instead have other cards that do similar things. Because after all, your commander is just a creature, can be removed. Croaking Counterpart, similarly to Cackling Counterpart. Nice play on words here. Also creates a token copy of something. Here we have Creeping Renaissance. 5 mana. Choose a permanent type. Return all cards of the chosen type from your graveyard to your hand. That's not particularly good. I mean, Deep Analysis is nice, but it already only costs 2 mana. Making it cost 1 is nice. Here, Deep Root Reconnaissance. We have a 3 mana sorcery that ramps you for a basic land, and it has flashback for again 3 if we have our commander. That's also not that great. Echo of Eons is the first one where I'm really like, okay, I'm on board. This is fire. You manage to discard your Echo of Eons, a 6 mana sorcery that is a wheel, aka everybody shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library and then draws 7 cards. The kicker here is that the flashback, unlike so often, is cheaper than the actual card. It costs just 2 and a blue. And of course, if on curve we play our commander, then the flashback cost will only be 1 blue. And this is where where we start to cook. Especially since Echo of Eons does not flashback exiles the card itself, so we can't get too abusive here, but yeah. Are there good flashback cards? I mean, there's probably cards that give all cards in your graveyard flashback, no? And the flashback is equal to their mana cost or something like that? I feel like a card like that should exist. Might be broken though. Let's see. Put top X flashback. Twice that many. That's not that great, honestly. 5+1/+1 counters, also not that great. Each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback. Yes, the flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost. Yes, that's the card we've been looking for. Leer or Liar. Who knows? Disciple of the Drowned. Human Wizards, 5 mana, 3/4. Spells can't be counted. And each instant or sorcery in your graveyard has flashback. Flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost. A quick ruling clarification. If a card with no mana cost gains flashback, it has no flashback cost. It still can't be cast this way, which is interesting. But stuff like this really opens up the archetype. If there's only one card, though, that can do something like this, it might not be enough. Of course, you can't rely on having Liar or Leer out all the time. Memory Deluge is just a good card. It is one of those blue card advantage spells. It's not particularly interesting to talk about. 4, look at top X cards, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast a spell. It also becomes worse, by the way, if you cast it for cheaper. So not that great. Here we have a 2 mana fog that turns into a 1 mana fog. That's okay. It really is just okay, though. We don't see a lot of like insanely cool stuff here. Snapcaster Mage. I mean, if you're in the market for a Snapcaster Mage, well, this commander might be for you, huh? There's a bunch of stuff that gives instants of sorcery in your graveyard flashback, which is very nice. But is that the best way to build a dock deck? There's the Vision Cycle. If you don't know, Vision Cycle is not the actual set. Is a cycle of cards that care about how often you've cast your commander from the command zone. No, sorry. It cares about the greatest mana value of a commander you own. Which is just 2. But then you get a 2 on top, which makes it a 4 mana commander. It's also not good. Damn. Another one that's pretty difficult for me to like find a good and interesting avenue to present in a video. Yes, we all know that casting vengeful regrowth is nice, and then if you get to cast a flashback for 6 instead of 8, that's also nice, but it's also not interesting, right? It's that if that is the best that I can do, I'd almost much rather not talk about the card, because everybody and their grandma can look at flashback and see that it's better if these cards cost less. Is there more stuff that you can cast from your graveyard? How does escape work? Let's first reconfirm what this card actually says and add all the cards. The big hit so far that for me, or the 2 big cards here, maybe actually 4 big cards, are Catalyst Stone, which has the same effect of spells you cast cost less to cast, although it only cares about flashback. Gaia's Will, which makes it so you can cast spells or lands or play lands from your graveyard for 1 turn. And Liar, which makes it so all the instants and sorcery cards in your graveyard have flashback. Those are the big hits, in my opinion. And then secondarily, Echo of Eons is interesting because it turns into a 1 blue draw 7, which is of course insane. But yeah, it says things you cast from your graveyard or exile. Oh, actually, I completely blanked on the exile stuff, which is something we'll look at next. This is nice because it opens up the commander a little. I first want to re-evaluate what, or like reread what escape does. I believe it's an activated ability that doesn't cast a creature. You may cast this. Oh, no, actually, you may cast this card from your graveyard for its escape cost. So here we have another keyword that works nicely with our commander. Unfortunately, the best escape card in our colors costs blue, blue, green, green, which we cannot reduce. Are there other good escape cards? Nope. I think escape is mainly a red keyword, I would say, and then maybe secondarily black. Okay, let's see what this Skyway Robber does. Escapes with: whenever this guy deals combat damage to a player, you may cast an artifact, instant, or sorcery spell from among the cards exiled with Skyway Robber without paying its mana cost. Oh, that's interesting. But it's also like, okay, cool. Cool story, bro. Let's look at the stuff we exile. And by now there is a bunch of stuff. Now, plotting in particular works the following. Do we have a plot card in here already? Yeah. So you pay 3 mana. If you have your commander, it costs 1 mana. And then at a later turn, you are casting the card for 0 mana. Which means the first line of text from Doc doesn't actually like matter here at all. But over the last few sets, not only have our characters just been wearing hats, all of the mechanics are also just, putting on hats on different mechanics. What are we making? We are making, I'm not sure how familiar you are with my channel. I have a mainline series where we look at all the most interesting commanders from a certain color or color pair. We'll move on to the tricolor wedges and shards quite soon. I used to do the research offline, but I wanted to get into streaming, so I'm streaming my research process for these videos. Usually, I try to hover around the 36 commander mark. I separated them into piles of 12 commanders, and then usually we spend 2.5 hours per 12 commanders and just try and figure out what they are about. The idea is to give the viewers, since this is mainly research for a video, the idea is to give the viewers, that little spark where they go like, oh, okay, that's interesting. I want to go down the route myself. I don't want to present them with a deck list. I want to give them inspiration. Right now, we are at the last 2 color pair, which is Simic And this is the first day, so you can see we go through these alphabetically. We're only at DO with Doc Urlock. And we're currently taking a look at all cards that you can cast from your graveyard, stuff that you can cast from your exile, and we already looked at Plot, but it wasn't a very... the well dried up quite quickly, you could say. But there is a mechanic that we've looked at already that works here as well, and that is Foretell. Foretell. Man, my chair is really squeaky today. Foretell is similar to Plot, but quite different. Foretell is actually closer to what our commander does, by the way. Foretell means here we have a good example of a creature that is just in general quite good. 5 mana, 6/5, trample. Whenever a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. You can foretell this card for 2 and 2 green. During your turn, you may pay 2 mana and exile this card from your hand face down. Later, you can cast it for its foretell cost. Okay, so on turn 2, you pay 2, you exile this card face down, and then on turn 4, the idea is that you pay the foretell cost, aka 2 and 2 green, and cast it a turn earlier than you would if you were just to cast for 5 mana. That's the basic idea. Our commander does not reduce the 2 generic you pay to foretell, but the actual foretell cost he does reduce, right? Because you are casting stuff from your exile zone. So that means it should work. Most well-known, maybe infamous, Elrond's Epiphany. On turn 2, you would foretell this for the 2 generic mana. You play your commander on turn 3, and then turn 4 for 2 and 2 blue, you can create 2 1/1 bluebird creature tokens with flying and take an extra turn. Of course, you don't need to do this turn 2, but I think the idea becomes quite clear as to why this is good. It's one of those mechanics that just seems like it was tailor-made for this weird little bear druid hybrid guy. That is one mechanic that the viewers can then dive into. I don't think I need to present much more than Elrond's Epiphany, which is enough to convey the idea of looking for foretell cards. So we've had Plot and Foretell. I am not sure if there is more mechanics that exile stuff from your hand that you can then play. I know that sometimes white exiles cards from opponents' hands and they become more expensive to cast. What else am I missing though? Foretell and Plot easily makes sense. And I think the Fibble tip we talked about earlier. Fibble. It's a nightmare to type out. Lost on a Range, I think, is the one, because it's the Thunder Junction card, right? This little guy makes it so you can plot cards from your library. It's just a bit of card advantage, and then once you want to... But no, plot... This guy is so weird in this deck. Because only plotting cards from your hand costs less. Ah, that's so annoying. We were this close to greatness. This close. Another mechanic I just remembered that casts stuff from exile is, well, is Adventure. I'm not sure if you can find cards like this. Yes, you can. So Adventure from Eldraine, if you remember, are normal cards, but they have these sorceries or instants stapled to them. That means you can... Let's take Beanstalk Giant, 7 mana, store. It's as tough and powerful as you control lands. For 3 mana, you can exile the card first to search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. And then once you cast the Beanstalk Giant from exile, it wouldn't cost 7. Instead, it would cost 5. Yes. This is how a commander deck to me comes together. It's like slowly finding these bits and pieces. Some commanders, of course, are super straightforward. They just say, hey, look up this keyword or look up this type. Include every card that has this type on it. But a commander like this, much more interesting in my opinion. I mean, Brazen Bora isn't a bit like. Oh, wow, it has dropped in price. By the way, I was sure this card is like a 15 euro card. What else is there? Are we missing any other cards like Cast from Exile maybe? Or Cast from Graveyard? Well, I guess. I guess I'll first pour myself some tea so I can stream again tomorrow and not lose my voice. We're all thinking Yawgmoth's Will, which we already have in Gaia as well. Cast from Exile. So what I'm hoping is to find cards that say, hey, you may cast something from Exile, by the way. You may cast non-land cards with cycling from your graveyard. Well, I guess that's somewhat interesting. Here we have Cipher, which is a crazy keyword. Okay. So, Arcane Heist, 4 mana. You may cast target instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put into their graveyard, exile it instead. Cipher means then you may exile this spell card encoded on a creature you control. Oh, but you get to pay it without. You get to cast a copy of the encoded card whenever the creature deals combat damage to a player without paying its mana cost. Now, if it says without paying its mana cost, then immediately it's less interesting to us. Doesn't mean it's a bad card. It just means, well, for our commander, it doesn't have any or our commander doesn't have any upside in this scenario. Let's see. There's a bunch of flashback cards here. Disturb. You may cast this card from your graveyard transformed for its disturb cost. Let's remember Disturb, but let's continue down a little. How many results do we have? 122. Okay, that's not too many. Disturb. I'm looking for more keywords. Here we have cycling. Disturb might be one of the last ones. Of course, it becomes increasingly harder here. Stuff like this also, unfortunately, it isn't keyworded, so it might be difficult to find. But yeah, exile a card from your graveyard. You may cast dinosaur creature spells from among cards you exiled with this guy. If we could find more of cards like this, it would be very nice. Cow was interesting, but okay. I think to close this off and then somebody else can point out more effects that work quite nicely here. We're gonna look at, oh god, was it Disturb? Yeah, I think it was Disturb. That's not how you write Disturb. We're gonna look at Disturb, see if we can find one good card to present the mechanic. Everybody gets the idea, I think. Malevolent Hermit, 2 mana, 2/1. You can sacrifice it to mana leak something, aka counter a non-creature spell in this case. Unless its controller pays 3, and then for 2 and blue, you may cast this card from your graveyard. And it turns into non-creature spells you control can't be counted. Flying 2/2. Okay, that's honestly pretty good. Mirror Hall Mimic, 4 mana, 0/0. It enters as a copy of a creature on the battlefield. 5 mana, Disturb. Okay, you can cast this for 5 mana, or if you have your commander for 3 mana. Turns into enchantment aura. At the beginning of your upkeep, create a token that's a copy of enchanted creature. Very nice. Excuse me. Okay. I'm going to include these two. And I think we're going to close this section of the stream or the video to move on to a different commander. This is already a lot of cards. Not all of them are like necessarily, we don't need to talk about all of them necessarily. Like these are flashback cards, all of them. So why would we need to talk about all of the flashback cards? But sometimes it does make sense to present everything. Next in line, much more straightforward, much less of a head scratcher, and honestly quite powerful from what I've heard, is Edric, the Spy Master of Trest. Because I won't forget this time. Haha! I moved the time counter and also the image. Top right, you can always see who we're talking about. Add one, move one to the main deck. Give it its tag of ED. And read what it does. 3 mana 2/2 elf rogue. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may draw a card. Alright, quite simply put, this guy provides card advantage for everyone. Most importantly, to you. It also, in a way, dissuades people from attacking you, which, especially if you're playing with new players, is quite powerful. They won't recognize the threat that Edric poses. Will ignore you instead because, well, if I hit someone else, I get to draw a card. So you will get to avoid a couple of combats and thus damage that you should actually be taking because somebody's going to be like, oh, well, but it could also be drawing cards, huh? Which already quite powerful. Just by the nature of its design, I think this one shines in bracket 2, bracket 3 already, and then especially if you have newer players who most likely won't start out at bracket 4 or 5. And then, I mean, the base of the deck for sure is, well, like, unblockable. Is that how they... Wait, what's the actual keyword? Like, what is the word? Can't be blocked? Can't Oracle be blocked. Is that how they template it? Yeah. Okay, so can't be blocked. Let's start with the 1 mana cards. There's a million of them. Of course, we want to hit our opponents. What's the best way to hit our opponents? We play a bunch of creatures that can't be blocked. Oh god, there's so many cards. Order by mana value, please. Let's see. Just one good example. Maybe two. Yeah, Mistcloak Herald. 1 mana, 1/1, can't be blocked. This guy then reads, once you have your commander out, 1 mana, 1/1, can't be blocked, draw a card whenever you deal combat damage to a player. Really good. Signal Blast, Slitherblade. There's a million of these. This guy, I believe, can only be blocked by creatures with flying. Also, especially in the early game, kind of unblockable. Unblockable. Did I not write it like this? It seems this is new templating, is can't be blocked. Okay. Instead of unblockable. I think that much is obvious. Then, the next step is, okay, obviously we are playing a bunch of unblockable creatures or creatures that can't be blocked. Oh, actually, let's talk about Shadow next. Shadow, 1 mana, 2/1. This creature can't or can block or be blocked only by creatures with Shadow. Also makes a lot of sense. to include cards like this, although maybe this one isn't the best one. So let's leave it out. This is just a 2-mana 1/1 that loots, but additionally it will also draw a card if you have your commander. Very nice. Is there more mechanics that make things unblockable? There is also the one that checks if the opposing creature has more power. Didn't they turn this into a keyword also? Anyways, I don't think it matters that much. What we should look at next is whenever draw card. So payoffs for drawing a bunch of cards. I mean, drawing a bunch of cards itself is already maybe the most powerful thing to do in Magic. But let's copy it just in case. No, okay. We can sort by name again. But there's cards that specifically care about us drawing cards, right? So, for example, Alondra Skydreamer. 4 mana, 2/4. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a Drake. Whenever you draw your 5th card each turn, Alondra Skydreamer and Drakes you control each get +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your hand. I don't think this will happen all that often because you will be drawing your cards in combat. So, I mean, it will happen. It just will be completely useless. But the draw your second card each turn payoff is super easy to get. You just need one unblockable creature and your commander. That really isn't much of a restriction. What else is there? Oh, this has all the card draw payoffs. That's why we're getting so few like good results. So let's maybe first look at the sub-theme of second card. Second, oh, man, typing is really hard when the microphone is right in front of your face. I'm not as bad at typing as it looks. I mean, yeah, Fairy Mastermind, but that's a different one. We're gonna talk about it in a second. Homunculus Horde, one of my favorite payoffs as of recent times. 4 mana, 2/2. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, create a token that's a copy of this creature. Super nice, super good payoff here. Whenever you draw your second card, create a 2/2 black green cat creature token, which of course then is potentially a creature that can draw you a card at a later point in the game. The next step that you should be taking in deck building around Edric is cards like Fairy Mastermind. Fairy Mastermind, 2 mana, 2/1 flash flying. Whenever an opponent draws their second card each turn, you draw a card. Edric, of course, also gives your opponents the chance to draw a bunch of extra cards should they just hit other opponents of yours. Fairy Mastermind will then make it so you benefit off of them hitting your opponents. And that is really, I think, an integral part of something like an Edric deck, or an Edric deck, of course, in particular. What else? What else? What else? What else? I mean, there's a bunch of cards that put counters on something. Draw card counter is maybe something we can look at. Still a lot of results. Most of these are whenever a counter is put on something, you draw a card, but we want the opposite. Whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Quite simply put, this is a 4 mana 1/1 flying, so it has evasion. Not a particularly good creature, but you play this pre-combat, then you attack with a bunch of creatures, and this will maybe turn into a 4/4, but it will grow insanely large over the course of the game. Maybe there's more cards like this, but again, we don't need to find all of them. And especially something that you should keep in mind when building a deck like Edric. Don't venture out too far when it comes to card quality just to get payoffs for drawing a lot of cards. Because remember, drawing cards is the best payoff you could be having anyways. Drawing cards makes it so you will never have a super bad game. You will be seeing so many cards that your deck will be quite consistent, and you'll almost always get to do something in a game. There won't be many dud games, in my opinion. So yeah, I don't think I'm going to venture much further into this Scryfall search. I'm sure there's a bunch of cards that say, like, whenever you draw a card, do X and Y. But again, I mean, we could be talking about stuff like 20 Toad. What a name. 4 mana, 3/3, your maximum hand size is 20. I am usually a big opponent of including cards that get rid of your hand size because, in my opinion, they are rarely worth. If you're drawing 15 cards and you have to discard down to 7, you're gonna be discarding 8 lands most of the time. Getting rid of 8 lands is not that big of a deal. You will be stuck with the 7 best cards that you could have drawn, potentially, and that's good enough. But if you're drawing a million cards like in an Edric deck, it might be worth considering becoming the guy that has a bunch of Uno cards in your hand. Whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures, put a +1/+1 counters on this. Ah, this is pretty cool. So finally, redemption for the card that I hate. Maybe it might be in my top 3 of most hated cards in Commander, and like hate is a strong word here. Reliquary Tower is more of a pet peeve of mine. The number of times that I've seen this card actually provide value to a player compared to the amount of times that I've seen this card's mana screw players so hard that they did not get to do anything for a couple of turns or sometimes even the entire game is incomparable. It is insane. And people love it. People are like, yeah, but what if I draw a bunch of cards? Is your deck capable of drawing a bunch of cards? Well, no. I played a game where the only reason why Reliquary Tower provided value to my opponent was because I played Cyclonic Rift. That was the only time, I swear to God, the only time that Reliquary Tower did anything. He was still mana screwed, of course. He couldn't play the cards in his hand. But at least he didn't have to discard all those, like, 5 cards that I bounced to his hand. Yes. Reliquary Tower, I could talk about it for a couple of minutes. But instead, I think let's move on. Actually, I'm going to do one last EDA track search to make sure we didn't miss something obvious. I think Edric is quite popular. So people will be, like, they'll be on their toes to correct me if I missed something obvious. Yeah, I mean, one of the cards that people play a lot is Tetsuko. A commander that I talked about in my Mono Blue video. He's a 2 mana, 1/3, creatures you control with power or toughness 1 or less. Can't be blocked. Interesting because it opens up a whole new subtype. But yeah, like, from what I can see, people are not getting too creative. You're playing a bunch of unblockable creatures. You go wide with these 1 mana cards, and then, yeah. I guess we can talk about cards like Beastmaster Ascension. Beastmaster Ascension, and Druid's Repository, which I didn't know existed. So I'm glad I did this little search. Druid's Repository. So, wow, what is this artwork? What the hell? I mean, I really like Avatar, but put some effort into your magic cards. Come on. Okay. Beastmaster's Ascension, very nice. 3 mana. Whenever a creature you control attacks, put a quest counter on this. As long as it has 7 or more quest counters on it, creatures you control get +5/+5. Very clear, very obvious to see that you're attacking with a bunch of Looter Elcors, Mistcloak Heralds. They draw you a bunch of cards, but they don't pack a punch. So what you want to be including is cards that make it so every little 1-mana 1/1 is a threat. And then the other card, Druid's Repository, which is too fringe to get such a nice art treatment. I'm getting a little snarky, I'm sorry. 3 mana, whenever a creature you control attacks, put a charge counter on this. Remove a charge counter from Druid's Repository, add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. I think this card is insane in an Edric deck. Like, genuinely insane. Because you'll be drawing your Mistcloak Herald will at some point draw you your Slitherblade. And it will also finance your Slitherblade. Because it will put a charge counter on this. And then you get to cast a Slitherblade for free, kinda. That's an insane card that should be played by more people, probably. I'm always debating. So my dream, if I may share, or one of my dreams, is to own one deck out of every color combination from a commander that I featured in a video. Just as, a journey down memory lane. And yeah, just to pick the coolest commander from every color combination that I found, that I talked about, and create a deck. Edric might be one of those commanders that is cheap enough for me to pick up, but at the same time strong enough that it's actually fun to play. And not just strong enough, but just fun to play, It does have a target on its back, though. That's for sure. Okay, but we didn't miss much. It is very straightforward. That doesn't mean it's not fun to play. It's just relatively straightforward to build. But as I've said before, sometimes I have all the fun building a deck and then I play it and it is not fun to play. Mostly because other people will hate you for playing it. But, that's sometimes how it is. How far along are we, by the way? Technically, we have 7 more commanders to talk about. Oof, I'm not sure I'll make that. We might do 4 streams, also because we have more time. Technically, I could stream every day until Thursday, or including Thursday. So we might do a bit fewer commanders, since it's already also been 2 hours, which is crazy. It's insane. What the hell? I guess I just had more to say, or maybe I was less focused today. All right, let's give this guy the tag and stay focused then. 3, 6, 7. Oh my goodness. Might do 8 commanders then. Essex, 6 mana 4 for flying is a fractal, which is a creature type we've seen a couple of times, but there is no real creature type synergy yet. At least not from what I remember off the top of my head. Flying, the first time you would create 1 or more tokens during each of your turns. You may instead choose a creature other than Essex and create that many tokens that are copies of that creature. This is very easily, very straightforward, a callback to Edric's, at least in terms of what we should be looking at. Biovisionary. At the beginning of end step, if you control 4 or more Biovisionaries, you win the game. Bio-Waste Blob. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a commander, create a token that's a copy of this. So you can see how, and oozes you control get +1/+1. So every one of these Bio-Waste Blobs makes it so your Bio-Waste Blobs are bigger. What this guy does differently is Edric's and Nev, they make it so you play stuff like Cackling Counterpart. That just makes a good token. Because this guy makes more tokens, or these guys, they make more tokens, but they don't make, like, they don't influence the quality of tokens. Essex here makes it so you can play the quote unquote shittiest token makers ever, and you just need to play good creatures. Ideally, and we'll find we'll find an example. You would be playing cards that make tokens but are also good. So the first card, and we've seen it today, but I didn't include it in the what's their name? Adrix and Nev section, is Tender Shoe Dryad. 5 mana 2/2. Subprolings you control get +2/+2 as long as you have 10 or more permanents, or as long as you once have 10 or more permanents, blah blah blah, you know, send. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 green subprolling creature token. The way this works is, of course, you would play a Tender Shoe Dryad, and then if you just have these two cards, the turn cycle goes, you create a subprolling for each of your opponents, then you untap, it's your turn again, and the 1/1 green subprolling that you would create instead turns into a Tender Shoe Dryad. And now the next turn cycle, you would be creating 2 subprolings, 2 subprolings, 2 subprolings. In addition to that, the Tender Shoe Dryad will also make it that so that your subprolings are bigger. An effect like this is probably perfect for Essex. I don't think it's the only type or profile of cards that you should be playing. What effects are we thinking that create 1,000,000 tokens? We're mostly thinking elves, at least me. Can we look for create X tokens? Just, you know, create X tokens. Okay. Probably 1,000 cards. It needs to be during your turn, by the way, so sorcery is perfectly fine. Ether Mutation. Return target creature to its owner's hand. Put X 1/1 green subprolling creature tokens into play, where X is its converted mana cost. This is Commander. Most commanders sit around the 4 to 6 mana cost. You have your commander, a decent creature on the battlefield. You play Ether Mutation, and you get X copies of that decent creature you have. Ether Mutation, normally not a very playable card, but here, I think you can kind of see how this goes out of hand quite quickly. When we're thinking creating good high-value tokens, you usually pay an extra price. Like, the effects just become more pricey. But stuff like Arachnogenesis. 3 mana. It works not that well. Let's read it, but then we can talk about why it doesn't work that well. Put X 1/2 green spider creature tokens with reach onto the battlefield, where X is the number of attacking creatures. Of course, remember, Essex, only during your turn, you will be getting those sweet, juicy copies of a creature. Here, Awaken the Woods, create X 1/1 green forest dried land creature tokens. Holy moly, that is a mouthful to say. Let's find one more example, although in the video, like 2 is a nice number to talk about. Ooh, of course. A card that I recently talked about because I think it is, like, it should be included in a lot more decks, is a card whose name I can't remember at the moment. Of course. Pest Infestation. 1/X. Destroy up to X target artifacts and or enchantments. So it could be 0 and you could still be paying X. Create twice X 1/1 black and green pest creature tokens. Juicy. So pretty much for every 2 mana you pay, you get a copy of target creature you control. That is so unrate that it's insane. Nakato Warpride is a card that I used to have. I am certain of it, and I can't find for the love of it. But I love this design. It's a 6 mana 3/3 from Future Sight. And it must be blocked by exactly one creature. Whenever it attacks, you put X tokens into play tapped and attacking that are copies of Nakato War Pride, where X is the number of creatures defending player controls. Remove the tokens from the game at end of turn. Now, I believe this works quite nicely with a commander that turns them into different tokens. And since this is a replacement effect, I also don't believe you exile those tokens. Although I'm not 100% sure that's how it works. So, this effect applies before anything that modifies how tokens enter. Okay. So it doesn't clarify here. All right. So that's pretty sick. We have examples of creatures that are good to copy. Biovisionary or Tendershoe Dryad. Good in different ways. Of course, this is like the perfect fit. It creates tokens, but it also buffs tokens. This is an alternate win con. I would like to try and find like one more good card. Just a good ETB maybe. And then we have a bunch of insane token makers. Excuse me. Getting a bit of a hiccups. Here we talked about good ETBs. A little. What are like the best ETBs in green that we can think about that aren't redundant? I mean, not to be boring, but this is a pretty good creature to copy. When this enters, creatures you control gain trample and +X/+X until end of turn, where X is the number of creatures you control. Of course, it requires you to have a Craterhoof Behemoth in play already, which usually means you've won the game. But if you somehow manage to play a Craterhoof and then play like a Pest Infestation for X's 4, hallelujah. The game is so over, it's crazy. Yeah. But is there more that we need to talk about? I think that paints a nice picture of this commander. Right? I think we're like we're making it quite obvious. What interesting things you could be doing with this commander. All right. That means 3, 6, 7, 8. And 8 times 4 is... Is that just 24? No, it's 32. And 9 times 4... Okay, we're going to do 9 commanders today. Eutropia, which, wow, what a name. Imagine your parents named you Eutropia. Add 1. Move 1 to the main deck. Eutropia, the twice favored, is a 3-mana 2/2 human wizard. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. That creature gains flying until end of turn. All right. Now, if we're thinking just Enchantress, this creature is completely and utterly outclassed by so many other cards. This doesn't provide card draw. What it does provide is evasion. We won't talk about much here, because so very clearly you would much rather play... what's the... blue-green white commander that just draws a card whenever an enchantment enters. Obviously, that's much stronger. right? Or just a different commander that draws a card whenever an enchantment enters. There's tons of them. What I want to talk about, okay, there's two things. Return aura, and it's a creature. There's a creature that I found. Oh, from Ravnica, I believe. That is quite interesting in a sense that it returns auras enchanted to it to your hand. No, actually, that's not true. But Gather of Graces is nonetheless a card that I want to talk about. Gatherer of Graces. Everybody knows. Yes, exactly. The 2-mana 0/2 white card, whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield, you draw a card and it gets +2/+2. Is it Auramancer, Auradancer, Spirit Dancer? Something like that. It draws you a card when enchantment enters, and it gets +2/+2 for every aura attached to it. So it's card advantage, and it grows quite large. Gatherer of Graces is much worse, for sure. But, well, it's green, so you can play it. It's a 2-mana 1/2, Human Druid. It gets +1/+1 for each aura attached to it. And you can sacrifice an aura to regenerate this card. Usually the worst thing that can happen to you in a deck that plays auras is you suit up a creature and you don't have enough protection. So somebody destroys it and you're very sad because you just lost not just a creature but 4 additional cards. This card makes it so at least destroy-based effects are still just 1-for-1s, and you're not losing the creature, which is often harder to come by in an enchantment deck, but you're losing an aura. Apart from that, the only thing that I find worth mentioning is you have here a good commander if you want to play just the silliest beefy auras. I know Colossification is not the best example, but the problem often with these green enchantments is they provide a lot of stat points. And by that I mean a lot. What they don't provide is they don't provide evasion. +20/+20 is not something to write home about if you can get chump blocked by a 1/1. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But your commander, and that is the one thing she does really well, is she gives evasion. So let's say you have an Ancestral Mask from a great set, Mercadian Masks, love it, which gives your creature +2/+2 for every other enchantment in play, even your opponent's enchantments. You can then use just any enchantment to give a creature flying and a +1/+1 counter. I think that's it. I don't have much more to say about this. It is an aggressively slanted aura-based commander, which I believe is not particularly... How do I phrase this? I think even if you wanted to play auras, you should probably be playing card advantage in your command zone if it's possible. But Commander is the place where you can just go, damn, that's a sick artwork. And I love this art, so I want to play this as my commander. And I think then what we want to point out is play big dumb creatures. The evasion comes from the command zone. Last on this list. By the way, I didn't move on. Again. Classic me. Experiment Courage is a 6-mana, of course, Simic guy, or more like creation, that reads: Experiment Crush has all activated abilities of each other creature with a +1/+1 counter on it. Tap, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. Well, did I hear somebody say combo? It reminds me a bit of the Mimeoplasm. I'm not sure if I can find it. But yeah, Mimeoplasm is a Sultai commander. You may exile 2 creature cards from your graveyard. If you do, it becomes a copy of those. Yeah, pretty much. No, actually, it's not that similar. Bad comparison. It's very obvious what you want to be doing with this. You just want to go infinite. There's a bunch of crazy abilities out there. The first one that comes to mind, a card that I've been wanting to run in a deck for a while now, is Horseshoe Crab. Blue, untap Horseshoe Crab. Well, alright. If you pair that with something like what creates a lot of mana of any color, there's a bunch of cards. But let's say, actually, let's look at EDH Rec. Yeah, okay. Incubation Druid. Incubation Druid. You have your Experiment Crush. Let me already change the artwork. I really dislike this one. Experiment Crush, Horseshoe Crab plus Incubation Druid. Immediately infinite cards. Right? Sorry, infinite mana. If +1/+1 counters are and everything. One of the best activated abilities comes from Arcanus, which has been power crept out a lot. But in unfair ways, you can still play it. It taps to draw 3 cards. It's a 6 mana 3/4. It has Summoning Sickness, so it's not particularly good. But if you just put it on Experiment Crush that can untap itself for 1 blue mana and create infinite mana, then yes, you draw your entire deck and then you win somehow. One thing that I would like to... all activated abilities. Okay. Is there something interesting that we can do with this? Is there something more interesting than just fully comboing off with every combo that is like exists in the Simic card pool? So of course, when we read an effect like this, we are thinking Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Still $24, by the way. Unfortunately, it needs like another ban for the price to go down. But 2 mana artifact. You tap to exile target card from a graveyard. When a creature card is exiled this way, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. And creatures you control with a +1/+1 counter on them have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. It works quite similarly, like these cards work quite similarly. Experiment Crush wants creatures to be on the battlefield and have +1/+1 counters on it. Agatha's Soul Cauldron wants creatures to be in the graveyard, but it also wants creatures on the battlefield to have +1/+1 counters on them, and it even provides them. So I think this is a must include. These two work hand in hand to create infinite combos left and right. How do we get +1/+1 counters on opponent creatures? That's the only fun thing that I could see you do is put +1/+1 counters on stuff. We've had a Rishkar. Rishkar is interesting here. So let's add the tag. Rishkar is interesting for 2 facts. First of all, 3 mana, 2/2, it ramps you, which is nice if your commander costs 6 mana. Then it gives a good activated ability because then starting with Rishkar, your Kraj will have the ability to tap for green. But it can put +1/+1 counters on each of up to 2 target creatures, including opponent's creatures. And that means, in certain scenarios, you could potentially go infinite with abilities your opponents control. And that's quite nice. That's quite nice. But I think this one is so combo coded, so straightforward that it might be a shorter section of the video, which I'm thankful for. Not every video needs to be 2 hours. They can be shorter. One thing that I like to talk about, I mean, this is one, like untap Horseshoe Crab is one thing, but I remember a combo from a long time ago. Pili... Is it not Pilipala? Is it written differently? Oh, I guess it's written differently. There is a creature from OG Lorwyn, probably from Shadowmoor to be exact. I think it's written with just one L. Yeah, there it is. This, in Shadowmoor, since everything was upside down, everything was the other way, instead of the tap symbol, they went with the untap symbol. So here we have a 2-mana 1/1 that for 2 and untapping it adds 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. And this is one of the ways to definitely get a commander that can untap itself and produce infinite mana because it taps for a bunch of mana. All right. Well. Do we have more interesting stuff to say about Experiment Courage? It seems so straightforward. This might be the most straightforward commander we've seen so far, because let's be honest, if you're copying just Arcanus and just value creatures, you're not getting even the smallest, like this is not even 10% of its power if you just draw 3 cards. The next step is, of course, untapping it. And then if you're untapping it already, why not tap it for a bunch of mana? Yeah, and I don't see, looking at EDH, right? I don't see people getting much more creative than that. Which is a good sign that, like, if everything is very streamlined, then, you know, the commander's not very open, because usually the community is quite good at finding suboptimal but more fun, like suboptimal power-wise, but optimal fun-wise, for them at least, ways to build around a commander. So, let's, before we close it off, reiterate what we've done today and what we found. Maybe some highlights also. We started off with Adrix and Nev, who act as a parallel lives, meaning whenever you would create 1 or more tokens, twice that many tokens are created instead. That means we were looking for cards that make high value tokens. It could be either stuff like Geralf, who creates very large tokens, or Asika's Chariot, which is just a good card that creates decent tokens. It could be spells that create copy tokens of cards, which is very nice. You could get a bit more creative with stuff like Biovisionary and Biowaste Blob, which you would then copy and create high value copies that way, right? Here we have Biovisionary, which wins the game if you have 4 copies of it at end step, or Biowaste Blob, which just makes all Biowaste Blobs stronger. And my preferred card here, my most favorite card, is Octomancer, which creates an 8/8 for an opponent, and then at end step you get to create a copy of target creature token that entered the battlefield this turn, which means you would be getting 2 8/8s. Just the turn it comes down. Very nice. Next, Alaundo. Alaundo, we looked at, it was a bit baffling at first. It kind of exiles cards as if they had suspend, but instead of taking down every time you have an upkeep, it just takes down whenever you activate this ability, which had me quite baffled. Because what do you then want to cheat into play? Big stuff is kind of out of the question, since you're just once per turn, activating this, so you would wait forever for your Omniscience. But looking at EDH Rec, that we found that people are just untapping it over and over and over and over again with stuff like Curious Follower. And one nice synergy is what doesn't work is you can't tap Alaundo to exile Ancestral Vision, because Ancestral Vision has 0 CMC, so you would put 0 time counters on it. And if you can't remove a time counter, then you can't cast Ancestral Vision. But if you first exile Ancestral Vision, you can then remove time counters from Ancestral Vision if you activate Alaundo. So it works this way, it doesn't work the other way. Exile Ancestral, activate Alaundo works. Using Alaundo to exile Ancestral Vision doesn't work. And then we figured out that copying Alaundo and making non-legendary copies of it works exceptionally well, because each copy of Alaundo just improves the first one by 1,000,000. Yeah, highlight card for me, Spark Double, for sure. Eric Smithies also had me a bit baffled. It is kind of like a land from the command zone, so you could be taking this into a landfall direction. I mostly wanted to point out ferocious and formidable as keywords that care about you having a bunch of very large creatures. We went more in depth on Clement, which at the front of its face is a frog tribal commander. 3 mana, 3/3. Whenever it or another creature you control enters, you bounce something to your hand with lesser mana value. And frogs you control can tap for either blue or green to cast creature spells. Very nice. So we, of course, talked about a bunch of frogs. Next step in the deck building process was, of course, to look at creatures that have, whenever another enters, do this and that. Guardian Project, very nice. Galagritas, very nice. Path of Discovery, very nice. And then the final step we took was looking at cards that cheat at mana value. That could either be in the form of Evoke, which means cast something for cheap, but it dies. Or it could be Warp, which means it enters, but then it also leaves the battlefield at end of turn. And yeah, my favorite card here was definitely like Anti-Causal Vestige and its interaction with this type of stuff. Play Clement, play Dream Dew Entrancer, play Anti-Causal Vestige. It has 6 mana value, so you get to return your 4-drop to hand, and then as per the effect of Anti-Causal Vestige, you would then get to return Dream Dew Entrancer for free from your hand. Although close second is like returning Evoke cards with other Evoke cards that have Flash. Also pretty cool. Dog Orlok also had me quite baffled. Not the easiest commanders to build around and find stuff for. 2 mana, it makes spells you cast from your graveyard and from exile cost 2 less. And plotting cards from your hand costs 2 less. So route 1 was to look at all the plot cards. There's not that many good ones, but we found some. Second thing that comes to mind is an evergreen keyword and flashback. There's a bunch of good flashback cards. And then to look at other things that you cast from either your graveyard or from exile. There is Escape, which I guess we could mention, but the Escape cards were super bad. Flashback, of course, and then Foretell, which you cast from exile. And very niche, but we found 2 decent cards. Disturb, which is a mechanic that also lets you cast stuff from your graveyard. Edric, very straightforward. It's a 3 mana 2/2 that makes it so whenever you hit an opponent, you draw a card. It also gives this ability to your opponents, but of course, if you build your deck around this, you will get the most out of this effect. You play a bunch of unblockable cards, and then my highlight card here, definitely Druid's Repository. 3 mana enchantment. Whenever a creature you control attacks, put a charge counter on this. Remove a charge counter to add a mana. Insane. Essex, we talked about towards the end. 6 mana, 4/4 flying. First time you would create 1 or more tokens during each of your turns. You may instead choose a creature other than this and create that many tokens that are copies of that creature. So you want good creatures like creator of Behemoth or Tendershrew Dryad, and then you want a bunch of stuff that creates a lot of tokens at the same time. Highlight here for me personally, Ether Mutation. It's not a particularly good card in any other circumstance, but it returns a creature to its owner's hand, and you create X1 Prolings. Actually, highlight card, I take it back. Nakata Warpride, 6 mana 3/3 that creates X copies of itself on attack, where X is the number of creatures that the blocking player controls. Which, of course, means you get as many copies of a creature you control. You get the same amount of copies of target creature you control, where X is the number of creatures someone at the table controls. Okay. Then we talked about Eutropia, which unfortunately power level wise can't compete with a lot of the other cards on this list, or even in its field of work, if you will. It's a 3 mana 2/2 that on enchantment ETB gives something a +1/+1 counter and flying. Only thing we talked about is how like these enchantments that only give stat boosts suddenly become a lot better because your commander gives evasion. And card highlight for me, because I just looked at the set, Gather of Graces gets +1/+1 for each aura, and you get to sacrifice an aura to regenerate it, which usually means you get to save a bunch of other auras from dying. Very nice. And then Cross we just talked about, so I'm not going to reiterate. It's just a combo machine. It is like, yes, this is Simic. We go big or we go home. In this case, you go super big. With that, we've talked about, what, 9 commanders? Which is perfect if we want to do 4 streams. We might finish next week. We might finish this week. I'll think about it a little bit. Because I also want to have like one day where I record the Boros video and not stream, because I can't do both the same day. I don't know. My voice just isn't trained for that yet. In any case, I hope you had fun. And as I always say, remember, be kind to yourself and others. Goodbye. See you probably tomorrow.